All right, folks, welcome to the Istio workgroup meeting. I saw we have a couple of things on the agenda today, so let's get through them. Mike, you're up first. Is Mike actually here?
I don't see him. He's looks offline internally. This is just a release update that code freeze is in effect for the release 125 branch. There doesn't appear to be any pending PRs open, so a release candidate is expected to be cut later today. Just a release FYI.
All right. That's great. It's exciting. We're getting a release out soon. All right. Should we move to the next topic? Do we have Puru here today? Certification policy for Istio release. I don't see him today, so I guess I'll move this to agenda for next meeting. Right. Hey, Mike, we just went through your topic. If you want to add anything, feel free. We basically just read what's on the agenda.
Yep. All good. Yep, just posted an update. Nothing to add.
Okay, cool. Awesome. I think I finally figured out the sharing, hopefully. No? Am I sharing my entire screen?
No, it's just the little bar that says you're sharing your entire screen.
Yeah.
That is so interesting.
I'm glad I'm not crazy though. This happened to me whenever I try to share on Google Meet, so I'm glad it's not just me.
Well, it used to be very, very simple, but right after I upgrade my Mac OS, somehow it's become pretty tricky. So
That's what it is.
okay, hopefully it's correct now. All right, sorry, it took me like 3 minutes to figure out the screen sharing. Okay, now you can at least have some screen recorded, which is nice. So Mike, I think basically we'll consider your topic done. Thank you for all your work on the release. Let's move to Daniel next, the config map. Do we actually have Daniel? Let me double check. I think this is Daniel from Red Hat. Is that correct? Not from Solo.
That's correct. There's a PR out that is linked there for custom config maps. Be great if he could join, but we can maybe you can ping him in Slack and follow up offline if he's not able to make it.
Okay, so does anyone wants to ping him? Oh, I can ping him quickly. So let me ping him quickly. So then we'll move to the next topic.
I can also follow up with him too. I left a comment on the PR to ask for alternative solutions that they considered.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Jesse. All right, so let's move to Keith's topic. I'll move his topic to in the future, and let's see show up later today.
All right, guess it's me.
Do you want me to present or you want to take it over?
You already presenting, and I don't want to mess up a working thing, so I appreciate it if you could share.
Sure.
Yeah, so bringing up the multi-cluster discovery doc, appreciate the folks who've already approved. I want to talk about one particular topic based on some early PR feedback. Lynn, if you could scroll down to the heading, I think we also have it in the table of contents for East-West Gateway, talking about the East-West Gateway implementation specifically. Yeah, so there, and then Actually, no, a little bit further. It's the East-West Gateway implementation. So it's a little bit right there. Yes, thank you. So today I wanted to sort of give an overview of this implementation section and talk about some of the trade-offs. So today in Istio, non-ambient, the way that you create an East-West gateway is you create instantiate the Helm chart or use an Istio operator manifest, and then you create an Istio gateway resource that sort of exports your services based on a wildcard selector. Most people, like the documentation just shows you using wildcard.cluster.local, and that's how you expose sort of all your services or a subset of your services via the East-West gateway. For this implementation, I'm proposing something that's different, and it's a departure from what we do today, based on the sort of where I've seen the industry going with some prior art, as well as I think maybe a different understanding of personas that are going to be at work in a multi-cluster ambient implementation. So what I'm proposing here is that we add a way to instantiate an East-West gateway via gateway API. That does not exist yet, to my understanding. You still need to have the Helm chart in order to make that happen. And this would be the only way to instantiate an East-West gateway for ambient multi-cluster because of the protocols that we need for HBone to be able to say HBone as the protocol. We create a new gateway class, and then here's the point I want to spend probably most of the time discussing. Users will expose their services via this gateway by labeling their services with an istio.io/export through label with a value of the gateway name that is exporting the service. And the form would be namespace.gateway name. The reason for this shift, and again, this is a little bit different than what we do in Istio today, is because thinking through multi-cluster from first principles, well, actually, let me go this direction. Thinking about the ambient and the ambient ecosystem and the experience for ambient, all of your gateways and sort of east-west stuff are waypoints. And this model is very similar to the waypoint model. With a service, you say use waypoints, and that's how you do that's how you attach a service to a waypoint, is by labeling that service or a namespace. I propose that we do have the exact same flow. It's got that nice symmetry for users. And another added benefit is that it lets East-West gateways just be waypoints for most intents and purposes. There's no need to create any routes or to do weird like listener exporting wildcard things. Service owners, service producers can export their services at the namespace or service level. And then later, in a follow-up design doc, we can talk about how clients can opt their traffic into going off the cluster. But this exporting flow is specifically for exporting the server, the back end of the request. Costin, you've got a question?
Well, question, comment on, and I see John probably has pretty similar comments. First of all, creating an East-West gateway, it's a gateway. It's no different than any other gateway. I'm pretty sure. I tried before. You can create a normal gateway, call it East-West gateway, call it whatever you want. It's still going to be a gateway, and you can attach policies to it. It's not. It doesn't require the chart or anything like that. It requires some knowledge of how to hack it, and I think it may require some hidden features, but it works. My concern is actually on the second part, on the label on the service, and I'm not sure it's the right approach for practical reason. I mean, people deploy Helm charts, going and edit your service and put a label on the service. It's very difficult. And has a lot of other problems. We already have a mechanism to expose a service on a gateway, which is HTTP route. So I would rather have an HTTP route with a label if you want that it's basically attached to the east-west gateway and is pointing to the service, rather than requiring people to put labels on the service. That's really my, and I think it's semantically it's equivalent. There is no difference between creating an HTTP route and expressing the fact that this particular service is exposing the gateway, which is a normal purpose of a route, versus putting a label on the.
If I can quickly respond to that, I do think, well, for one, we already have labeling of services and namespaces like in Istio today. Like that's how you expose a service through a waypoint. So I don't know. I don't know that I understand why one is more burdensome than the other. You would have the export label in your Helm chart, the same way you would have the use waypoint label in your Helm chart.
I mean, to be clear, I mean, the fact that we have something that is not very user friendly doesn't mean we need to add more. And I'm pretty sure it was possible to have waypoints without putting the label. I think it's still optional. You can still maybe something changed, but originally it was supposed to be you deploy a waypoint and you don't have to. I mean, unless you want to explicitly point to a specific waypoint, you don't have to do service labeling.
You need to do the namespace label.
Yeah, namespace
at
label
the
is good,
minimum.
but there's not a service label. There is a difference between
That's
service
right. The
label, which is
service is
Yeah, we could-
optional if you use a namespace label.
yeah.
Sure, yeah, we can have a space label for this as well. I think that would be that's actually probably an omission here. I think it's perfectly reasonable.
That's
to
also
have.
fine. I'm happy with per namespace, but per namespace doesn't work because you don't want to expose all services.
Right.
That's why you need something. I mean, the fact that label is required for waypoint, if it's not, and even if it was, it doesn't mean that it's good. We need some way to indicate that this service export, HTTP route, something that doesn't touch the service. That's my only requirement basically here.
Okay, John, you've had your hand up. You go ahead.
Yeah, I think pretty similar line. Like, I just don't think this is the right UX at a high level. Like, ignoring all implementation details of the ambient. How do I expose a service through an east-west gateway? I'm not sure why we want to, one, force a service to declare it through a new API, and two, if they do, why it needs to point to something and not just be like truth or something. We have like 8 APIs now to mark something as global. Like I'm very skeptical of a additional one.
Okay, I'll set aside the which where you're exporting it through. Set that aside for a second. I guess the thing that maybe I just missed it, and apologies if I'm not understanding it, but I just don't see the difference between this API and use waypoint. Are we saying use waypoint is bad and therefore this is bad? Or
yes, that's what I'm saying. Anything that has labels is based on labels is bad. It's again not completely bad. It's usable for some purposes, but it's not a good UX. It's a acceptable UX given that we don't have alternatives.
So
okay,
I
that's one
think
vote for bad.
I'll abstain from opinions on waypoint, but I think this is much worse than waypoint for a few reasons. One, there's only allowed to be one east-west gateway per cluster. I think we mentioned somewhere else in the doc or the code or something, or at the very least, in all practical purposes, there's only one. So naming it is it seems redundant and just a place to go wrong. The second one is that why does a service owner care about this? Like, they care about which waypoint they use. That actually impacts them. That's saying like, I want my policies to be enforced. Here's the waypoint, like go do the thing. It just doesn't make sense to me that a client can call a service and that service is this multi-cluster service. And then, oh shit, the service producer forgot to expose it on the gateway. And now it's blocked. Like that, why make them go through the extra step is what I'm missing. If you want to say, like if I'm reading between the lines, maybe I'm making up reasons, but I could kind of see like maybe, I as a service producer, I don't want to accept clients from outside the cluster. That's fine, but that's something that should be handled at a different layer, like authorization policy.
So, John, I don't disagree with you that it's worse. I mean, it's definitely worse than for waypoints. If labels on service or ingress were a good UX, we wouldn't have HTTP route. That was one of the main ideas. And for waypoint, it's acceptable because it's not required. I mean, it's only used in very specific arcane cases where advanced users may want to use some different waypoints as the default. But the normal process for a user is they put a label on namespace and they are good. That's anyway. I think we have more or less almost consensus that label is not ideal and we should look for some alternative. I think we can move forward with other things, but.
I mean, so going to the points that John brought up, like that is the scenario you brought up as far as the service owner. Like I do see that as a decision that the service owner needs to make. Like that's the whole, in my mind, that's the reason why in MCS the service owner has to create a service export, right?
But this is very different, Keith. This is not saying that it's global. It's saying it's exported through a gateway. Why should a service producer care that a client is in a different network?
And it may not be the service owner. I mean, the person who's controlling the multi-network properties of a system may be a different persona than the person who is installing the application. I mean, your service is usually part of the Helm chart that, like Istio and everything else. The decision to export a service is usually independent of the decision of creating a service. They are different things.
Really? Again,
of course.
And maybe I just misread the MC aspect, but my understanding is that the service owner writes the service export.
Well, the service owner, not application. I mean, usually service is written by the application developer person. I mean, the persona who's actually putting a service export and the RBAC permissions for service export are not necessary. You don't have service export usually included in charts.
So if I'm somebody who's writing my service, I know, like I experienced this when I implemented Istio multi-cluster in my old job. We have to go and make sure that the services are ready for multi-cluster traffic. Like the service owner might not want to accept traffic from remote clusters. There are data locality issues. Like this was actually discussed in one of the earlier versions of the doc. In my mind, there are client side and server side concerns with cross-network, cross-cluster communication. And so it feels like, and again, for Cilium has an export label. I feel like I've seen a couple other implementations that also have an export label. If you want to debate like whether it's a label versus a route, that's one thing. But I feel like I'm a little bit surprised, I guess, at the pushback at the need for like a opt-in to letting things talk to for my service being exported.
That's not what this is saying, though, Keith. Everyone, I think, has agreed in the past to have a way to explicitly say this cluster is a multi-cluster service, whether that's making the cluster at a local one include endpoints from other clusters or a new host name like clusterset.local. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. But what this is doing is not that. It's actually taking that and throwing that away, what we all agreed on, and making a new API that only partially solves it by focusing on networks instead of on the concept of a service being multi-cluster service. And that's where I have concerns.
I see that API was client side, right? That API was based on the thing, calling the service based on like the DNS name, for example, or whatever qualifications, like based on the client side, I decide whether the traffic crosses the cluster or network boundary. This is on the server side.
Why does that matter? Ultimately, the client decides what IP address to send traffic to. So it is a client side decision. What you're saying here is that now it's actually both, and they need to agree.
Yes, I think
it should
that
be
is what
something
I'm
handled
saying.
by authorization.
Okay,
like
so
if you want to block someone, which is I don't know, if you want to block someone, you can't, right? That's an authorization policy property. Or at the very least, like today. Sorry, I keep it.
Go ahead.
All right, now I'll go ahead. All right. So today in Gateway, which Costa mentioned a long time ago, is actually just a normal gateway. You do specify which host names you expose through the auto pass-through listener. Technically, right. That is true. However, in practice, like everyone essentially. Just puts wildcard there and allows everything.
For what it's worth, I think that's bad. Just to be clear, I think that's I don't love that. But
I agree
go
with
ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like if I don't know, let's put it this way: if I was on a single network, I couldn't possibly enforce this, right? So why now that we're in a multi-network do I suddenly want to enforce it? And plus, it's much better now because we are terminating MTL, so it's not like any random person could somehow trick their way in, right?
Okay, that makes sense to me as far as like the single network versus multi-network case, where, like you said, in a single network you can't enforce that. There is no way to basically, like, that is off decision. So if the argument is we need to have a uniform way across single and multi-network to be able to say what's exported and not, that I agree with. I think. Oh, go ahead, Costin.
That's what routes are for. I mean, that's so as a network admin or whoever is maintaining the routes, and you declare that a particular service is accessible through different routes with different host names and different paths. That's normal behavior, and there is nothing specific to Istio. We don't need to create an API for that since it already exists. If you want, fine, great. As John was saying, if you want wildcard, you can have wildcard. You don't need to a new API for that. And the model with routes work, you can have as many east-west gateways. You can have some gateways that are first class, some that have bulk traffic, different network. You can have whatever complexity in network you want defined through routes. The problem with services that are multi-cluster to work properly is client side, not server side. I mean, if you export a service, the clients need to be aware and need to control if they want to route to cluster 1, 2, 3, and other, or to keep it local. That was the whole problem with multi-cluster in the past, was that the clients were spreading traffic to services that were not ready. I mean, you can export the service no matter what to a gateway.
The funny thing is, what we do today in multi-cluster Istio, non-ambient for sidecars, their logic's not on the route either. It's on it's a service. It's like an export API within the Istio gateway resource on the listener, basically.
I know, but
so it's sort
doesn't mean it's right.
I agree. I agree. So that sort of, that's basically what this is. So summarizing the conversation, I think this has been good. Basically, in my mind, there are two different decision points that need to happen for successful multi-cluster communication. The service owner that owns the server needs to opt into letting that server be accessed across multiple clusters. The client also needs to opt into having its traffic go cross-cluster, cross-network. And that, and to John's earlier point, that experience needs to look the same. That experience needs to be consistent, regardless of the implementation detail of single network versus multi-network. Routes felt heavy for this, and I also wasn't necessarily completely on board with the idea that there's only a single east-west gateway per cluster. I don't think we necessarily have that restriction today, and I can imagine some multi-tenancy use cases for having multiple gateways. We can follow up on that offline. My takeaway here is, again, those 3 points is that needs to be opt-in for client and server, and needs to be consistent across multiple across multi-network and single network. Is that a pretty good summary?
I have a question about client opt-in. So I agree that from a code perspective, the client is the one that makes the decision. But that doesn't mean from a user standpoint, the client is the one that makes the decision. So are we talking about both of those with, what does that mean concretely?
Yeah, great question. So the best way for me to explain it is probably to refer to MCS and the reason why MCS made the cluster set local decision. So in MCS, when you opt into using, and the client says send me to a cluster set.local DNS name, that is the opt-in for having the traffic go across multiple services. If you want the traffic to stay local to your cluster, you have you use the cluster.local DNS name. So like that's the level of opt-in that happens in my mind. Does that follow? Does that make sense?
But is it really, as far as I understand from your kid, it's just you're saying when the client dials a service, so it will use different DNS, right?
That's the
what
decision that MCS
yeah.
does. That's the MCS
Right.
level of the decision. But like that decision does exist, is what I'm saying.
But is it really an opt-in? Because as far as I understand, like as far as I like I had in mind before, is like opt-in means that this route, like not route, but this ability to route traffic would be available for me. So the opt-in means, like, for example, if I'm a server, right, like I'm a service owner and I opt in like all the services in cluster A to be to you know, to go through one of these East gateways, then all the clients are now getting all the information for the endpoints on the other cluster as well, without opting into actually getting them. So like the opt-in for me is like one step before, not the actual dialing. It's the actual like config getting to the client.
I think, you know, we are using MTLS, we are using, you know, mutual trust, mutual consent, mutual authentication. Everything needs to be mutual, even if the default may be one or the other. It's not acceptable in networking or in security to have only one side controls the other. So there is an API to indicate that this service is allowed to be exported to different paths. I mean, I want this service to be reachable from the internet, from a corporate network, from another production network. That's perfectly fine. You can have multiple ways to get traffic in and to accept traffic. But each client should have the control, doesn't matter what the server is saying, to decide, I want to send traffic locally, I want to send traffic to via the internet or via a particular gateway. So we should never have any API that is, you know, one side controls the other. That was a mistake that we did, and I don't think we can justify it in right now.
Yeah, I think I agree with those principles. John, you asked the original question. Does that make sense as far as the client side decision?
Sort of. Like I thought we had talked about this in the past with cluster.local and having an API where users could kind of control this. Because
Yes,
I agree, there's people that like to have a new host name, and that's great. And there's people who don't. So having flexibility without obscene complexity to get it would be nice. And I just thought, to be honest, I don't remember all the details. We have it written down somewhere, but I had thought we'd kind of come to a at least loose consensus around all that. So.
Yeah, I think we are in agreement on both of them. You know, but I think the server side is more or less a solved problem, and we have plenty of ways to express export or via routes or via service export or via other things. Client API, it's still, I don't think we have full consensus about how what will be the shape of the client API, but we agree we need one. That's for sure.
Yep, I just put the client side design doc that I'm planning for beta scope in the chat. But we do have several other topics, and I'm happy to follow up offline on this. Thanks for the discussion, folks.
Okay, cool. Can I ask a quick question? So on the gateway resource, maybe I remember wrong. I thought there is a way to spin off the Istio East-West gateway today for sidecar using the gateway resource as well by specify the East-West gateway class.
No,
I assume
in Istio there's just a gateway, and there's only one type of gateway, and they can be an ingress and egress or East-West based on how you configure it.
Okay, so you
There's only one
basically
core
put
concept
not gateway API. Correct?
got it.
No, you can
So
do it. You can do an East-West gateway with Gateway API today, and it's all the same Istio gateway class.
Got it. So the difference
do you
would be you configure your listener and your pass-through mode to indicate it's East-West gateway.
So Istio can decide, I mean, basically, if you have a listener on port 15008 with type HBON, it can decide to configure whatever is necessary. There is it is not really required to do the environment variables. That's just kind of a clutch or implementation detail.
Okay, so basically we don't necessarily need a gateway class, if I'm hearing correctly, if you configure like listener and TLS mode correctly.
If you do things correctly, meaning explicit opt-in, you don't need it. If you want to have the automated stuff we are doing that John described and that Kit and me are kind of disagreeing, then you need the environment variable, but that can be easily avoided.
Got it. All right, thank you. Should we move on, Keith?
Yep, go ahead.
All right, thank you so much, Keith, for presenting that. All right, do we have Stephen here?
I'm here now.
Hey,
Yeah,
go
I just
ahead.
I was gonna start working sometime on the Envoy, adding ext proc support to Istio, and I just wanted to check if anybody has any strong feelings about it, about whether to add it or not before I start working on it at all. Okay.
Well, hold on. I have opinions, but we need to. I don't know like what the plan is, so I need to go look at that before I form them. I will have tentative opinions, so I'll put it that way.
Okay. I'll look into more and then do you think, how could I get those opinions from you?
Yeah, I mean, we just need to figure out like what we want to do. Like we're in an awkward state because of past decisions we made around extensibility. In particular, that x.z is tied to authorization policy, and that like WASM plugin is its own thing. Like there's an alternate path where maybe we had a filter or extension API that could be WASM or Lua or xproc or xstop. But we didn't do that. So now we need to decide, what we do, which path we go down. And, there's all sorts of decisions we need to make. Or if we do this as well, because obviously Envoy filter is an option, maybe not the right option, but.
Okay, so I guess my question is, how do you suggest I approach this, given that there's so many paths forward?
I'm not sure. I'll have to think about it. And I mean, I don't think I have the strongest opinion here. So
okay,
I'm just brainstorming some things. I just didn't want to be like, oh yeah, all clear. Like, let's go. We'll get this approved. Tomorrow and Xbox.
Yeah.
I think it's a kind of tricky problem. So. That's
yeah.
all.
Okay, so maybe I just come up with like a preliminary API, and then that's a good starting point for discussion.
Mike has a hand, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, like, is this specific to ambient that we're looking at? And, like, to what extent does this intersect with whatever direction, like, Gateway API is interested in going for, like, policy policy? Like, is that relevant at all for this or not?
That's a good question. That's something I'll think about. Unless that somebody has a direct answer to that right now.
I mean, I don't know if he has the correct answer, but with at least from what I looked at this problem, MTLS is usually a complicated part with so how do you have security between Envoy and the service, and with ambient it's much easier. So solving this problem for ambient, if you have Z-tunnel in place, can be far easier than configuring it with V1.
Okay. Okay, so I guess the questions right now are, how does this interact with Gateway API, whether we want it only on ambient or also with sidecars, among other things.
I think also there's isn't Gateway API looking to add this as a first class Gateway API thing?
For the inference?
Okay. No, not the inference.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just xproc as is.
Yeah, xproc is like, it's in the bucket of potential things that we're looking at for a way to do a like generic extensibility mechanism for auth-z. It was like xproc and xauth-z, and there were like trade-offs to like, if we want to make one of those interfaces standard. I think we were leaning towards like the X.Z one. I'll have to dig up the issue or discussion. There was basically some applicability to potentially being able to like standardize this in a way that could be implemented beyond just Envoy implementations. I'll see if I can find it and drop it in the meeting notes.
And by standard meaning that only Envoy supports it and nobody else. That's kind
No,
of
no. So like that was specifically the interest was that it is a generic enough protocol. I don't think it's XProc. I think it was X.Z we were looking at. It was designed in a generic enough way that other proxies already have implemented it. And it could be a way to expose through Gateway API a standardized way to do like OAuth integration and things like that.
X.Z, yes, it's more generic and it's kind of just
Yeah.
make an HTTP request, but XProc is the one that we're discussing here.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I was getting mixed.
Yeah, I mean, it was XOZ that we looked at, Mike. But yeah, XProc is specific, but you know, I can tell from inference there is also some things that could be explored for other implementations to support that as well. But yeah, one comment on what you say, Costin, about MTLS concerns, whether it's with ambient, but would it still be valid that there's no concern if the XProc server is outside a cluster?
That would be a concern, yes, but we are discussing service. If you have it in cluster, ambient simplifies the problem. If you have it outside of cluster, you are back to square one and you have to implement. But usually outside of cluster is not Istio MTLS, it's a different problem. You need to have proper TLS, you need to authenticate to some JOT tokens. It's not as simple as it is if it's co-located with the server or if it's in the same mesh. Because you cannot have on an internet XProc or Z that just sits there without any authentication and accepting connection from random dudes.
Right. Yeah, I was saying this is a part the thing, like whether this should be considered as part of designing this API. This API goes. So you know,
it gets very complicated. I mean, it can get very complicated if you include how do you authenticate with open, use what to, how do you, what's this, any of the external supporting for external services on the internet. It's a very different problem than supporting mesh services and different feature more or less.
Yeah, how we've solved this for other things, which like there's I think 14 extension providers at this point, so this would be a 15th, is we just basically point to an Envoy cluster more or less. I mean, that's abstracted to the user, but that's ultimately what they're doing. So then any existing Istio APIs to configure that. Notably, though, that basically only means TLS. Like we don't have a way to configure an Envoy cluster to add like an OAuth token or something like that. That's something that Envoy, I think, can actually do, but we don't expose that.
Also, to remember, setting this up means that you're doing these things on every request that comes in. XProc's on the data path.
I think you can put it on your specific routes. You can override it per I don't remember what, but
the thing,
yeah.
The thing with X, I'm not sure how it's to expose it, but the thing with XProc, like, right, it's on the global level, but then you could do overrides per route, which are pretty limited. But there are some hacks to just enable it per route. I think the override per route were mostly used to disable for specific routes, but there is a way to define globally, and just in the processing mode, if you're familiar with the protocol, you just do skip for everything. But then per route,
that's part of the complexity with designing the API. Is that today there's no API in Istio that does anything like that, pretty much. Like X.Z, for example, as far as I know, it runs unconditionally.
Yeah,
that's why I added that comment there. For me, I would like XProc on the Envoy clusters, not the routes, because then you can. For the routes, you have traffic splitting, right? So then, ideally, in my use case, XProc, I want to know after that, and then you have upstream filters on clusters.
I think this use case is extremely useful, but I don't think Envoy supports it.
It does,
and I don't think reality supports it, because we had many discussions. Anything with per cluster becomes very, very complicated because many authorization decisions are done before the route selection, before the when you do the either connection establishment or before routing, and applying policies that happen afterwards, it becomes very, very difficult. and risky because almost nobody will get it right.
Well, the
So
way
I
I
think
view
we-
it is like, hey, I want to apply an XProc policy on a Kubernetes service, essentially, right?
You may want it, but it doesn't mean it's feasible. I mean, many
It
things that
is
we want
in
are not
Envoy. In
feasible.
Envoy, it's feasible. It's feasible in
Well,
Envoy.
wait,
How do you
no,
do it
how?
in Envoy?
Let me see. Hold on.
You can do it at route level or listener level. You can't do it at cluster level though.
Yeah.
You can. There's Let me see. Hold on.
Oh, they made
With
an
standard
upstream filter.
APIs that are broadly supported.
Let me take it up. I can post it in the channel somewhere. Let me see.
I mean, with enough Envoy filters, you can do anything, but doesn't mean that everything you do is right or it's scalable or it's supportable or it's
I'm not
secure.
familiar with an Envoy filter way as well of doing it, so I'll be very interested to learn.
Yeah, I gotta dig it up. I think clusters have like a type config where you can do upstream filters.
Yeah. It looks like this is super new, I think.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, it looks
can you
like it
send a
does that.
link?
Cool.
Oh.
Yeah, I'll send it.
But again, the fact that Envoy just added some feature to do something like that possible doesn't mean it's a good API. Because semantically, decisions about authorization should not be done at the end, they should be done in front.
That's fine for auth, but I'm saying
Yeah,
like, hey, I have a non-auth XProc use
Yeah,
case.
it's really two totally different use cases. Like the
Yeah.
LLM instance router, for example, it picks the cluster based on. Oh, actually, that's not true. Well, there's XProc servers that pick the cluster, right? So you can't have that as a cluster filter. But there's other cases where obviously
No,
doing other things.
so I think the export server picks the endpoint from the cluster, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I stopped. That's it. The LLM example was a bad example. But like you can have an XProc server that picks the cluster, right?
Yeah.
It's
Right.
a valid
Yeah.
use case.
For that is good. I mean, for we use it for injecting tokens, for example, in Cloud Run. So that's how the per cluster. But that's not for authorization. It's for doing small changes before at the end of the path.
I mean, for authorization, it's concerning, but is there concerning for other things, Costin?
If it was called, ext routing or ext delivery or whatever, not ext.z, and people will not try to use it for authorization.
No, but we're talking
It's called XProc versus XProc.
Oh, XProc. XProc, it's a different story. I mean, what I discussed was ext.z. I mean, we use ext.z. With XProc, it's a bit more complicated than ext.z.
Should we wrap this topic up? We also have two other topics. I think, Stephen, you have enough to investigate.
Yeah, definitely. And then I'll come back some other time with something more.
Okay, cool.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Dave, I think this is you, right?
Yeah, the Envoy filter. So I see
Yeah.
that Envoy filter is half supported for ambient stuff. Essentially, sidecars are treated as waypoints are treated as sidecars when applying Envoy filters. And then John has a PR up to kind of remove that half functionality. My suggestion is like, hey, can we just add like a waypoint context and then allow filters to apply? So I have kind of like this PR just adds the constant waypoint to the context option or enum, whatever, in the API, and then there's a subsequent PR that kind of just adds the hooks to it. And then I think John's comment is just, do we want to support this or not?
Yeah, I think my view is there's really two problems with which is one, like, should we do Envoy filter and ambient at all? And then if yes, how do we do it? I think that this PR to add the waypoint context is one step to doing it if we choose to do it. I don't think it's the only step. For some context, the implementation today is totally fundamentally broken. So regardless of whether we want to do it or not, which I think I can see as being controversial, the current implementation must go. Like, it's totally broken. Target refs is like the API we use for waypoints everywhere. And if you set target refs on Envoy filter, it's just ignored. And by ignored, that means it's treated as a global policy. Then we like randomly apply it on random code paths of like using the sidecar inbound context, using the sidecar outbound context, applying it to like some random filters and other ones. Like, it's a total mess right now. So no matter what the current state needs to change. We just need to figure out which path we go down on that change, I think.
John, one comment you made here that is controversial. I want to try to understand how accurate it is and how controversial. Anyone here believes that ambient should support and maintain envoy filters? And can you raise your hand if you think envoy filters are, after all the experience we have?
I don't know how to do the thumbs up. I have a use for it.
I mean, everyone has a use, but is it something that as a committee we want to maintain and support? And I mean, it can be used in some, works or whatever, but is it something we want to deal with and maintain and for customers and people who expect ambient to just work?
Yeah, I think rather than assessing individual users that have a use for it, the question is like, what are those individual use cases, and are there better ways of achieving them that we would consider more preferable?
Yeah, I want to provide some background to why I reacted with a thumbs down. Again, totally get that there are folks who need it, who need what Online Filter provides, Dave. My desire is that we continue to use the lack of Envoy filter in ambient as a stick, or carrot, I forget which one, but as a motivation to actually implement some of the things in a less hacky way. Like the main reason we're even talking about XProc right now is because we're trying to find a way forward without Envoy filter. If Envoy filter continues to be this escape hatch in ambient, then it's going to be really difficult to get anything done because folks will just say, oh, I can just use Envoy filter. And on top of that, it's not like Envoy filter is a ergonomic and supportable and beneficial API. I can't tell you how many users in Slack I see asking for help with the Envoy filter and nobody can help, because to be honest, today Envoy filter is like arcane magic that people get working for their setup, and I copy and paste Envoy filters back and forth in order to try to get that use case working. Like it's not a good state. And so I'd rather us as a community be encouraged to add functionality in other places, to invest in things like XProc, invest in things like WebAssembly, to try to solve what we can with it. And then only then, when we have that done, we can open up a conversation about, what other, is Envoy filter worth it? But until then, I don't see that technical debt's going to be worth it.
I have a PR that implements this. It's like very few changes.
No, but this change here is not sufficient to.
No.
We also need.
You have to go to
target
the
wraps
other...
and.
Even if it was,
the issue is
workloads.
The issue is not implementing Envoy filter. It's having Envoy filter exist. It's an easy thing to add, and then it's a nightmare after that.
The CL may work, but then someone will need to support it, document it, and deal with customers that use it and all the other stuff. So I don't see a lot of controversial in what I heard so far.
Yeah, it's not just like the implementation surface areas maintainers, it's like what it allows to be plumbed through that becomes problematic.
I kind of just don't view this as an extension point, like an escape hatch when Istio doesn't do something, and there are things that I need it to do that it doesn't do. And to me, you have this alpha API that applies to like sidecars, gateways, and then I don't see why it can't apply to the waypoint.
Because that's kind of the consensus that it's not something we want to support for ambient. Not, and as an escape hatch, if you really need, I mean, what I would suggest instead, since Gateway does support it, it is possible, as far as I know, still possible to run a gateway instead of a waypoint, and then route monitor.
Yeah, that's...
You want to use it only for very, very specific cases and keep it, as limited as possible. And for that, you can have a, go through a gateway.
Yeah, I'm looking really specifically to patch part of the Waypoint Envoy config.
By the way,
My
what
ex-
is your user case?
I'm actually adding xproc and clusters to the Waypoint, my own clusters.
Okay.
I want to sidecar an xproc server to the Waypoint.
But that's we just discussed that we are very open to have xproc support in the first place through a proper API. I mean,
I understand, but I guess I'm saying like I don't want to wait months.
then implement xproc.
Yeah, the risk is, I mean, as everybody says, Envoy filter is very hard to use. And Dave, you might be more familiar with Envoy than many of us here, right?
Yeah,
You were able to point
I
out.
learned Envoy.
So you are not our typical average user, and there's a balance of the project, right? We can make sophisticated user like you happy, but a lot of user would have complained about, wait, this Envoy filter broke on my cluster upgrade, right? The moment I move to the new Envoy or new Istio,
Yeah, that's
it breaks
expected.
things. That's
Yeah,
what we
you can't
heard
give
a lot
guarantees
of
for Envoy
complaint.
filters.
That's
But-
the worry why we don't want to support it in ambient, because we had a lot of user, complaint in the past.
What is blocking you to adding xproc?
If it's remain, one second. Quick question: if it remains like experimental, whatever. So just to make sure the current Istio non-ambient do we state anywhere that when you upgrade Envoy filters are not guaranteed to work?
Right, yeah. That's
Yeah,
why
it doesn't matter how
I
much
thought.
warning you add. Like we literally have a warning on kubectl apply that says you're doing it wrong. Stop using Envoy filter. It does not matter. There's nothing you can do to stop people.
So the question is, I'm trying to understand for balance, because for context, I also know, like, also been part of this users growth, and a lot of users where they need this extensibility, and the reason they're choosing these two for large scale is they're doing some very advanced use cases. For example, like some people are implementing their own authorizations with Lua and everything. So a lot of it is Envoy filters. So I'm trying to understand like how do we balance between allowing this extensibility and documenting, hey, this can be broken, and then people who are not want to be broke just don't use these self APIs, to not allowing
doesn't
everything
help.
and then have. Sorry,
Sorry, I thought you were finished. I apologize. Go ahead.
I'm saying like, yeah. So the balancing between those people to those who like to basically say, hey, we don't want you to be broken, so we're gonna make decisions instead of you, and it's not gonna be supported. So I guess I'm also not a fan of Envoy filters, but I'm just like saying it's a bit of a risk where people would just go to a different project to allow extensibility.
I mean, I guess my question is who? I mean, part of what has made Istio so popular is extensibility, but it's a double-edged sword, as we've been discussing. Yes, users need some extensibility, and that's why, like, we're talking about xproc. It's why working on trying to get WASM working at some point. But there's just
it's the alpha support, WASM deployment in ambient.
As alpha
Yes.
Envoy filter.
Isn't there a way where WASM is broken with these two upgrades?
Less broken.
So you're saying like there's no way a customer, like a user, would be broken if it was
There are ways to break everything, but it's less likely to break it with WASM or with xproc or with xdots than it is to break it with filters. Filters are the most dangerous. But to what you said, I mean, people do have this flexibility and will continue to have it. We are not, V1 is still there. You can use Istio V1 with sidecars if you want this extensibility. I mean, you are already an advanced user, you already have someone who supports your use case, because with Envoy filters you need someone dedicated. So just use V1 until we have the API.
I think ultimately when there's a feature in Envoy or a single property in Envoy, and people know and want to use it, then this is where the filter comes in and is useful. And then I think, like, I know the risks involved with Envoy filter. I know it can basically change, things are deprecated, etc., etc. Also, like the internal config that Istio generates can tweak over release. So I think the risks are there, but like having this escape hatch is useful. It's not just Xproc, there's other stuff too. Like I want to be able to change the clusters and stuff like that. Like here's a valid example, right? Like seems like people on the call didn't know you could add upstream filters, and then eventually this simplifies the gateway LLM inference extension. Because right now it patches the route a certain way, when instead now you can patch the cluster to do all that stuff, to change it to a DSD cluster and update the endpoint header that lets you select which backend to route traffic to. So just like I guess because Jackie's posting like, hey, does Xbox solve my thing? No, it doesn't. There's more that can be done. But I wouldn't say like figuring all this, like what should be I guess the way I view it is like trying to land functionality that exposes Envoy functionality in Istio is, I think, more complex than me having an Envoy filter at times because of the Envoy has a legacy API surface, maintaining testings, upgrade scenarios, all that stuff. Versus like, hey, I'm willing to potentially have breaking Envoy changes in lieu of being able to move faster.
But I think that so far the consensus seems to be that for ambient, the main goal is to have maintainable, secure, safe, kind of a good user experience and all that. For Istio V1, we still have, so if someone has those needs, they can be met with V1. If they want a stable thing, we don't necessarily need to combine it and to take the worst from Istio V1 and put it in ambient.
I don't consider like patching the Envoy config a horrible thing.
It is a horrible thing for most users who have to maintain it. I mean, it's for the community who needs to deal with upgrades and all the other stuff. I mean, it's.
I think another way of saying that is, I completely empathize with needing to get needing to ship code and needing to get something out. Completely understand that. But it's not by allowing online filter and ambient, we're not just allowing you to pay that cost. Every other user of ambient has to pay that complexity cost. Every other user, like if you tell any user, you can either copy paste this config to get your feature today, or wait for the supported thing in 3 to 6 months, they're going to do the first thing in most cases and find themselves broken later on. And we've seen time and time again, despite official documentation, tweets, John's blog posts, I've seen documentation in every conference talks, everywhere. We do everything we can to tell people not to use Envoy filter, and yet and still we see I see tons of reports from people, Slack and GitHub, who are supporting this legacy thing that's dependent on Envoy filter, and it's just not sustainable for them. And we don't want ambient users to fall into that same trap.
I guess I understand for novice users. So, all right. Well, I guess take a look at the PRs I have out and see if you have. Oh, sorry. This is something else. This is a different topic. If you scroll up, there's like two PRs that I think just kind of be able to add filters to the Envoy thing. This doesn't cover John's whole thing about like, hey, it's a mess, let's refactor a whole bunch of stuff. But I think for the most part, in order to have filters applied at waypoints, those are the two PRs you need. But I do need this is me being a naive Istio contributor, not knowing all the warts in the system.
I mean, it's great you're presenting here, but I think the challenge right now at the moment, from what I'm hearing, is does the community wants the Envoy filter supported in ambient?
Well, I don't know. Well, I guess as a user, yes.
As one user,
if you look
but
at
we
Envoy
don't-
Gateway, right? Like they offer patches to the Envoy config, and also, for example, extension server plugins
which we also support on our gateway, by the way. So
Like
we're
an
talking
extension
about
server
the,
that modifies the Envoy config, lets you
I mean, we
modify the
support
Envoy.
Envoy filter on our gateway, right? Maybe not the extent prog.
Yeah.
So I think we're running over. Jackie, do you have anything? Oh, Mike?
Oh, just quickly, I was just, Dave, it'd be great if we could get a list of the things you're trying to do with Envoy filter. I mean, not saying we could add support through, Istio to expose all those things, but it'd just be great to get that insight, to get a kind of complete set of what you're trying to do. I think that'd be really helpful from our perspective.
Well, yeah, reach out on Slack. I'm there.
Okay, great. Thanks.
I was just going to add a little, Lynn, Dave, that's actually a really interesting point about Envoy Gateway. I don't know that thus far we've had a lot of experimentation with alternative waypoint implementations. I'm curious if this is maybe a path forward where, like, using Envoy Gateway as a waypoint implementation could be a way to, like, externalize this.
No,
like-
because like I kind of highlighted on the Xproc scenario, like the way they do cluster mapping, for example, like Kubernetes services and HTTP route backends, how they map to Envoy clusters is not the way I need it to work. And I brought up as an issue in that community as well. But it's one of those things where I think they made a fundamental choice in how they produce their Envoy configuration that doesn't work for me. So then what you're suggesting doesn't work. In theory, yeah, if you could swap out the waypoint easily, then that'd be kind of cool. But
I mean,
that's
so
an
yeah,
interesting
like
thought.
Ambient is designed to support swapping out the waypoint implementation. Like, maybe this is something where if you have a homebrewed Envoy implementation where you deploy raw Envoy somehow in like the sandwiched mode, that might be an option.
Yeah, if you had your custom control plane that implemented everything just the way you want it to.
Or yeah, it just takes Envoy config or something like that. Like, if you can generate most of it, and then yeah.
Well, if I
It'll be a
if I
pain.
have I can have a fork of Istio then, right? That's what you're suggesting.
No. You could just have your own waypoint and your own controller manage that waypoint. You can still use Istio.
I guess I'm not familiar with how the waypoint is set up now. I see what you mean. I know
Yeah.
I can swap the gateway class on the waypoint, but yeah, interesting. Okay. Who's a good person to ping about like the waypoint stuff, like the internals? Because I'm assuming is there like a document that describes like the semantics the waypoint needs to adhere to and the contract. Like, for example, I know there's a each bone port. Is there other stuff?
There is a community user who submitted a Istio Day talk who has done this. I can give you his GitHub alias. He's active in Kubernetes Slack. I can put you two in contact.
Okay, cool.
And at least one of the like original ambient design docs should describe this at a high level in terms of like sandwich mode. I'm not sure which one or how accurate it is as the implementation continued on.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Maybe we can find that for you.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll start from there. And then I'll bug John, as always.
All right, we're way over. Should we wrap this meeting up?
You know,
guess folks.
discuss the last point. I've been deving on Mac ARM since I have a new one, and then I noticed I'm assuming no one devs on Mac ARM in the Istio community, so these are some fixes to address some issues I found.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it would be good if we can review those offline then.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. See ya. Bye.
Thanks.